All right.
All right, three, two. Adding someone to your bank account or property title might seem like a very simple way to keep things in the family, but that simple move can cause some pretty big problems. And so today we're going to talk about why joint ownership isn't always the shortcut it appears to be, and how it can backfire when it comes to probate, taxes, family dynamics, and control. Welcome in. This is New York's Asset Protection Roundtable, a three pillars of protection program. He is Ted Alatsis, attorney and counselor at law at the Alatsis Law Firm in Brooklyn, New York. You can find everything online at alatzislawfirm.com. I'm Ben George. We're great to have you. We're glad that you're with us today and looking forward to another conversation about an important topic. But first, I want to welcome you in, Ted. How are things?
Things are good. Summer's here, and we're getting some warm weather, which is always welcome. Just hope it's not too warm and something we can handle.
Yeah, you guys, any plans coming up? Any trips? I know you guys like to travel a little bit.
No, nothing big planned this summer. We're hopefully do a couple of weekend things here or there, but nothing big planned.
Okay, very good. Well, glad that you're joining us wherever you're listening to us from. We appreciate you being here. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do so as well. But today we really want to talk about joint ownership and why, that seems like an easy solution, but it can also create a false sense of security. So to kind of kick things off, Ted, when you talk about why people choose joint ownership, it feels like an easy solution, right? But why do people typically go this route?
Well, I mean, for that simple reason, right? It's easy. People get married. The first thing they do is they, open up joint bank accounts, or they buy a house together, or something like that. And so, it's pretty simple to set everything up so that if one of you goes, the other gets it. So it's a very simple, almost a default type of arrangement that people can go through relatively easily.
Yeah, I think we've all kind of been down that path, as you mentioned, especially getting married or having children. It's a very simple process and easy, really the easy thing to knock out. It's kind of low hanging fruit. So you just have to kind of take care of it. But when you talk about joint ownership, there are two main types, right?
Right. There's joint tenants with rights to survivorship, which essentially, means that if one person goes, then the other person gets it. No hassle, no muss. And then there's tenants in common, or which basically means that each person has an interest, but based on the number of people that they're holding title with.
Okay, so it's a little background on joint ownership and how it's typically structured. So let's go a little bit beneath the surface and talk about some of the problems. And there are a number that could creep in, which we want to make you aware of and talk about how you can avoid these and why putting a plan together is so important. But the first one is when you do this joint ownership, that it doesn't always avoid probate, right? And from what I can tell, that's something you would like to try to do if possible.
Yeah, that's correct, right? So when people have up, and the easiest really scenario is in a house, right? So if husband and wife, for example, have property with joint tenants or right survivorship, if they both happen to pass away at the same time, so similar type of accident or something like that, then the house still has to go through probate for the remaining beneficiaries, or if there's a one person passes away, the other one gets it. Now that person doesn't want to necessarily leave it to the same people that they both had intended originally. So, that would also become a situation, or that person doesn't do anything about the ownership once they get it, and then it still has to go through probate. So, lots of different things can go wrong when you're doing that with regards to joint tenants with rights to survivorship. If you have it as tenants in common, right? Let's say, and this is more typical when you have, say, siblings owning a piece of property or something like that, then one passes away. Now that person's share is part of its own estate, and it doesn't go to the person who's left on the deed, in which case that's going to require probate. So doesn't avoid probate in all scenarios.
Okay, that's good to know. And again, a reason why you want to set up a plan to try to avoid that if possible, just to make things easier for everyone. And I know with joint ownership too, Ted, if you are the survivor, it is your property, right? You don't have to share, which could create some problems if there are some people that are left out of assets they think they have a right to.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we run into this a lot of times, both in the real estate context, but often, in the bank account context, where let's say, husband and wife have a piece of they have an account with a child, but they have four or five children, and they trust that one child to, when they go, divide everything equally amongst the kids. Well, that child is not obligated legally in any way, shape, or form to divide that with those siblings of his. So there is no legal obligation, and there's really no way to enforce a legal obligation in that scenario.
Yeah, it could create some issues for sure. And when you talk about problems with anything that deals with finances, I know taxes often creep in here. So there are a couple of pitfalls you have to be aware of, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, especially with real estate, because in the real estate context, you don't get an automatic step up when, to the basis necessarily. So there's a lot of context there. You have a husband and wife scenario, and maybe one passes. That one share gets a step up, but the second share doesn't. There's a lot of issues, and the step up is important for capital gains considerations and things of that nature. Which means that when the kids inherit, there could be potential issues. So you want to avoid those types of things. So tax consequences are an unintended consequence of joint ownership if you're not careful.
All right. So we're talking about choosing joint ownership, why it could create a false sense of security. Again, if you have any questions for Ted, we always encourage you to reach out 718-233-2903 or find much more online at alatsaslawfirm.com. All right. What about creditor risks? I know that can be a problem with an estate plan that's not set up correctly. So what could happen here?
Yeah, so you have to be very careful on how ownership is held, certainly, because that can play a role here. But let's say one of your co-tenants, people who own who are entitled, has creditor issues. They owe money to American Express or someone else. Those debts can become a liability that attaches to the property of that person, which can be an unintended consequence. So you want to try to avoid things like that, and that's where trust can come in and be a very helpful tool to avoid those concerns if you have them. So it can become a liability to the other tenant holders.
Okay. And then similarly, I know, if you have someone that's also a co-owner, joint ownership there, you don't have full control, right? When you do decide to share that, the co-owner has equal rights, whether or not you feel it is more entitled to you versus them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you run into that sometimes. And real estate is probably the most common scenario where you have four people on a deed, and they're all joint owners, but only three want to sell and the fourth doesn't. Well, that fourth now has basically a veto over anything that goes on with that property. So that might be one of those unintended consequences as well. So not having something in place, not having some sort of structure in place there where one person or committee can be able to deal with disposing of assets, selling them, investing them, whatever it is. That could be a problem also. So you got to be very careful when you set up a joint ownership situation.
All right. And then one last kind of pitfall to be aware of is the person that you want to make a joint owner of whatever asset it might be, they just might not be ready, right, Ted?
That's right. And once you've put that person's name on a deed or you've added that person in title, now you can't take them off unless they voluntarily agree to do that. And so sometimes that becomes a real problem. So you've got to be very leery and very careful of who you put on as a joint tenant in any scenario.
So as we kind of wrap this up, what role would you play in this conversation if someone is thinking about, maybe adding joint ownership to something or going through this process and just thinking about what their options are out there to help take care of people? I know you want to avoid confusion. You want to avoid this family conflict. Most people do. So how do you help walk them through this and help make decisions on these assets as they're putting together a plan?
So as we're talking about that, about this possibility, we do discuss the pitfalls and let them know what the downside would be if they did something like this, and what the upside would be as well. But overall, we would certainly kind of counsel them against putting the property in a scenario where you have that one person having a veto, or you create these other ancillary unforeseen circumstances that may arise. And so we kind of go through all those scenarios with our clients before they make the right decision.
All right. Well, if you have questions for Ted, we'd love to hear from you, 718-233-2903, or log on, alatsaslawfirm.com. When you're there, you'll see a lot of different stuff, including some free guides you can download right now to learn more. You can schedule a consultation. You can learn more about TED, whatever it is. You'll be able to find it right there on the website. But we hope this clears up a little bit on joint ownership and and the problems it could create. But again, sit down with a estate planning attorney, get your affairs in order to make sure you avoid some of these conflicts and potential problems that could arise. Ted, as always, thanks for your time.
Absolutely, Ben. Great to talk to you again.
Thank you for listening once again to New York's Asset Protection Roundtable, 3 Pillars of Protection program. We hope you have a good week. We'll talk to you soon.